Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefuhl. There are 8 different engines available on Volvo's lineup of SUVs, and they've given us just a small sample to get a good cross feeling of what's available. Now this, I think you can probably describe as being Volvo's most workmanlike of their engines. This is a 4-cylinder diesel, it's 2 litres, produces 235 horsepower. Let's move to the XC60 and see what we've been provided with there. Wow, well, this is the hybrid engine. This is providing you with a straight 4-cylinder petrol engine, a 2 litre, that's 303 horsepower and 400 Newton meters of torque. But don't forget, we're not all done there, because we have also an electric engine here, and that gives you an extra 87 horsepower to play with. Let's see what they've given us with the XC40. Well, we're all about efficiency and price point here, so the engine should represent that. When we take a look in this bay, what we're looking at is a 3-cylinder petrol. That's a 1.5 litre engine producing 156 horsepower or 265 Newton meters of torque. Interesting to me to note, in part of our cost saving with this car, we have no sound deadening on the bonnet itself. But if you press down on this, the engine cover itself is actually soft touch material, and that means that very cleverly a lot of the noise deadening has actually been built into the engine itself. That's a nice feature. I'm very pleased to see, in terms of making cost savings on this car, we haven't skimped on adding gas struts to this bonnet as well. So let's say that price is not your primary requirement, but you really need to know what space that you're getting with this, depending on what you need to put into the back of these things. Well, clearly, if you're going to want to transport 7 people around, it's a no-brainer. You're going to need to go with the XC90. And even with those 3 rows fully up, you still get a very pleasing amount of space back here. What you're looking at is 315 litres of load space, even with all of those 3 rows engaged. And we put one of the seats up just to show you what that means. If you fold that down, you get a very handy 692 litres of load room. Well, I think you can agree that's more than generous. But obviously that comes at a price point. So let's take a look at the slightly smaller, a little bit more town-friendly XC60 and see what that can bring to us. Well, the slight compromise we have right from the get-go is that because this is a hybrid, we need to make a little bit of space for our charging cables. And as you can see, that is not nothing. That does take up a little bit of room. We have a look under the bay here. We can see that there might just be enough room to fit those in underneath, so it shouldn't compromise you too much. In terms of overall space here, we are looking at 505 litres. So in terms of the most accessible standard available space, I would say that this is the car to go with. Why? Well, because you're always going to have that 3rd row, I think, practically in use. There is no 3rd row to worry about here. So this is a great car for everyday use if you do not have to have that 3rd row of passenger seating. Now, the smallest are most cost effective. Have they done away with all of that available space in order to hit their price point? Very pleasingly, the answer is no, they have not. This is 460 litres of load room and a very nice practical layout. Look at all that space. For a small car, I really think they've delivered an excellent job of managing to make a good compromise between room and usability. Volvo not only managed to make sure that their cars looked incredibly distinctive and kept that fantastically iconic Volvo styling, but also managed to make them feel and look contemporary. Now we can see that very strongly in the latest iteration of the XC90. Look at the boldness of this front. You would think it would be very difficult to know just from glancing at this that it was a Volvo, but when we look slightly higher up, and Thomas shows us here the flanks of this bonnet, right from the start, coming down into this nicely angular array and this big bold grille, we can see immediately this is a Volvo. Like many of the other brands, we have a nice integration here featuring this large bold central logo of the sensors, meaning that you don't get any additional clutter when you look at the front of this vehicle. Now, let's take a look inside. This is the R design. That makes it the top sporty interior trim. From the moment that you sit in this car, you're very much impressed with a feeling of how grown up the experience is. There isn't anything on here that feels like it's overblown, overstated, or cheaply made. The materials are all really good quality, they're all nicely put together, and they all just add up to saying to you, you've arrived. This is sophisticated stylishness you would expect from a Swedish product, and it is distinctive. You're not going to sit in here and think to yourself, is it a little like a Mercedes? No, it's not. The entrance price on this particular model is 68,000. And by the time we have all the whistles and bells that this car has been fitted out with, you don't get very much change from 100,000 euros. So really, it ought to be good. So let's start at the top. This is a very interesting and unique integration of the sound system into the car. It's also a very good place to demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about with all these optional extras coming to you at a price. Volvo have decided to go with this. Instead of what you standardly expect with the landscape view, they've gone with portrait. And what I like about that is it distinguishes itself very much from its competitors and also from looking as if it just has an iPad integrated into the dashboard. This is very much a signature piece of Volvo design. So it looks unique, it looks really clean. Let's talk about what that means in terms of how you use this car on a daily basis. Well, the most common features you're likely to want to access are obviously heating and cooling. And while I'm stationary here, let's just turn the car on. So we've got some, there we go. You can see this is preset for 23 degrees. If you know the temperature you want and you're happy to keep things consistent, it doesn't need to bother you at all. But I ask you, are you really going to want to do this while you're driving? That requires an awful lot of attention. The actual driver's display is really nicely thought out. We have a head-up display here. It's discreetly built into the dashboard, and that delivers only the most simple information to you in a really easy to digest format. The exact same can be said of the driver's digital display. This is really nicely delivered. It's simple, it's discreet, it doesn't give you any more information than you want, but that said, once you start digging into sub-menus, you can find options for more or less anything you could want to look at. Look at this drive mode selector. It's nicely placed. I really like the texture on this wheel because it means when I'm not looking at it at all, I absolutely know that I've hit the right thing that I want to look at. To select it, I just push on it and then roll up and down. It really couldn't be simpler. When the XC60 launched in 2008 in a category we would call compact SUVs, it was a real question as to whether or not we were going to be able to carry over all of that styling into a smaller car, but still make it look distinct. Well, that is obviously the gold standard of design challenge. And as Thomas pointed out to me earlier, unless you really pay attention, when you see one of these in the rearview mirror of your car, it's really difficult to distinguish easily what it is that's sitting behind you. Well, for my money, this is my favorite aesthetically of the three designs. It's carried over that big, bold styling of the XC90, but it adds a little flair all for itself. There's additional angularity in this design and a slightly more compact form. It means that the car still looks aggressive and sporty on the road, but just a little bit more stylish for my taste. What do you think? Now let's take a look at the XC60. Well, as you can see, this key is a very similar design to the 90. It's only the fabric on the outer surface that lets you know it's different. Well, as I said, the first impression that I get when I sit in this car is one of complete uniqueness. I really like these individual features. Okay, as I said, they might not be to everybody's taste, but they really do make the car look and feel special and different. This is a very recognizable integration of the infotainment system, so I won't bore you by going into details again. It's exactly the same system, it works the same way. And like the other system, come on Volvo, piano black everywhere, fingerprint central, but it's not overly done, so that's okay. Now, the experience of using this is exactly the same. The sound system, again, is a lot of additional money. Now, this car, I think, has an entrance price of around €72,000, and once you put in all the whistles and bells, 92.5. Ouch. So I can't help but ask myself why some of the finishing just doesn't quite go with the car. If you've watched Thomas's review, you will know that he has not been massively impressed by these steering wheels, and I understand why. They are very nice to use while driving, but the finish of them just doesn't resonate quite with the quality that you get somewhere else. I have no idea why it is we've gone with this shiny finish on the driver's controls. They are very nice to use while driving, but to look at, well, maybe it's just my taste, but I would have gone with something a little bit different. Let's take a look at the central console. Now, on this model, we have a crystal gear knob. That is to help us select the modes on this, the most expensive of the engines. This has not only the engine, but also an electric engine to assist. And that's why when we look slightly further down here, we can see that we have an extra drive mode, this B down here, and that is for recuperative driving. 2017 and the birth of the XC40. Now, a subcompact SUV that seems from a design point of view like a high-risk game. Why? Well, we know that SUVs have to be tall, they have to be bold, but we know that their most common problem was body roll in design terms. So how do we put all of that into a really small package? It's something that all of the manufacturers have to address because, as we know, this is the future of the car market. How does that impact on Volvo right now? Well, I can tell you, these three cars, their lineup of SUVs, make up over 50% of their global sales currently. So clearly they're doing something right. Well, when we look at this one, I think the most surprising thing in visual design terms is that we maintain the height of the previous two. You would absolutely think that's to be impossible. Look at the way that this front presents. This car is much smaller, much more compact than the other two, but in visual terms, referencing from the front, it has the same bold characteristics. I like that it's been brought down to look a little bit more affordable. I think that's the way of framing it. Look at this, we have a plastic grille and we very much have what I would call an urban styling. This car looks as if it's going to be very happy driving around town, picking up kids and doing the shopping with. So now we come down to the XC40, and here I have to be honest, it does feel as if Volvo are trying to make sure that you know this is the cheapest of their SUVs. So we have a plastic key, plastic buttons, and it really looks similar but doesn't resonate the same feeling of quality in the hand. I guess that's what you'd expect. Now here we have the momentum trim. I think that makes us 3 for 3, doesn't it, Thomas? Okay, let's do that again. Here we are. Here we have the momentum trim, and this, it will not surprise you to learn, is by far the cheapest of the three cars that we are showing you today. This has an entry-level price of just, I say just, it's still not nothing, €34,000. Now, as we have it equipped here, obviously a lot of additional bells and whistles, this comes in at just over 48,000. Ouch, that is a lot of cash, but it is still a lot less than its two bigger brothers. So what are we sacrificing in terms of interior finish? Let's take a closer look and find out. I think the key is a fair introduction to this car. Right from the second you climb in, you are very well aware that you are sitting in, I think economy might be an unfair word, the more cost-efficient version of Volvo's SUVs. That's not to trade anything off in terms of what the car delivers though. Don't forget, this has still won multiple awards as well, and all of the technology that has been baked into the bigger two carries through to this one as well. So, come on, if you're interested in having a Volvo SUV experience but you need to price to make sure that you can afford what you're doing, you're still going to get an awful lot of that Volvo SUV experience in this car. So I certainly don't want this to sound as if I'm being too negative about the experience. But if you're going to spend less money on the interior fit, then less is what you are going to get. So let's take a look at this styling. Well, right from the get-go, the materials feel and look a lot more basic. When we look at these design trim levels coming through the car, obviously they are going to feel a little bit more in keeping with price point. The infotainment system is still recognizable, so we're not going to spend too much time feeling about that. And the steering wheel experience, well, although it's carried through from its bigger brothers, we've gone with a matte finish here. I can't help but think that although that feels a little bit more ergonomically satisfying to use, it might have been nice to have maybe seen some metal here on the higher trim levels. Now this car features the 6-speed manual, that's to help keep the price down, rather than the automatic. But it's a very nicely built gearbox. We'll come onto that when we talk about the driving, and it's very nice and painless to use. Let's start where it all began, with the XC90, the first and many would argue still the best. Well, in 2002 when Volvo came out with the XC, a lot of people felt that Volvo had a reputation for quality build and value, but it wasn't necessarily always seen as a premium brand. The XC90 changed all of that. Even in its early first edition, it was immediately well received. And throughout its various changes through the years, it's only become more and more popular and helped push Volvo into that upper echelon. Now, as I said earlier, this car is available with a choice of 8 different engines, so you're certain to be able to find what you're looking for. We have one of the less powerful diesels today, and I'm very interested to see how much that will come into play. This car weighs 2.2 tons, and to put that into perspective, that is the same unloaded weight as the XC60 with a hybrid engine and all of those additional batteries. So, okay, we have over 400 Newton meters of torque, we have plenty of heft in this car, and we have a 0 to 100 predicted time of 7.8 seconds. Well, that's not too shabby either. Top speed of 220 kilometers per hour. But do we have the power where we need it in this car at the time? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the drive, how it feels, and whether this is the engine you're going to want to go with if you want to buy one of these cars. Let's go. Even with the available weight on board, it's really nice to be able to see that you can still push crisply off the mark with this engine. Being a diesel, you are always going to experience a little bit of turbo lag, more on that later, especially when you're driving at slightly higher speeds. We'll find a little bit of road in a moment just to show you how that impacts on the drive. The drive itself, I think you could only fairly describe as sublime. The air suspension has been so well tested and utilized within this car that for large sections of the drive, irrespective of the drive mode that you're in, it really feels a lot more like floating along the road than it actually does like driving, even in some really appalling conditions. But of course, that depends on what you like when you're driving. And I have to say, in my experience of driving this car, I still would have liked a little bit more responsive feedback from the road. Even when you have it in dynamic or sportier driving modes, you still feel that you're lacking a little bit of the feedback from the road that I personally would like. But that's taste, and I think a lot of people are going to be very, very happy with the comfort that this air suspension provides. And don't forget, it is always optional, so you don't have to have it if you don't want it. Now, talking about those driving styles, well, selecting them is actually very straightforward. Because of this nice tactile driving mode selector, we really don't have to look at it very much at all, and we can just pick through our driving modes, whatever suits the environment we're going through. The XC90 is a very spacious car, but Volvo have managed to pull off a bit of a trick. It doesn't drive like the size that it actually is. It's much more nimble and responsive than you would expect. We have had the opportunity to take this on what I would describe as mild off-road, but there is acres more experience of this car doing exactly that to demonstrate that it is more than capable if you want to use it in any space. Part of the popularity of this vehicle clearly is the fact that you can drive 7 people round in it and still have enough room for plenty of luggage in the back. find out how its smaller brother, the XC60, gets on. Well, the first thing to note here is that, of course, we have two different power sources. And that means when you start the car up, it's going to start in pure electric. And for the uninitiated, that can be a little bit of a surprise because you switch it on, and of course, you're expecting that nice throaty noise of an engine firing up, and there is literally nothing. Obviously, you're in electric power to start off. Now, you'll remember me mentioning that we have two different driving modes to select from here, either D, standard drive, or B, which is recuperative driving. So we're going to start off in standard D just to see how we get on. Now, this delivers a much faster driving experience than the diesel that we've just taken out. We have a 0 to 100 kilometers time in this car of something just a little around about 5.5 seconds. So that means when you put your foot down in this thing, it moves. Now, because we're in Austria, we have to be nice and careful with our driving. Of course, you have to be nice and careful everywhere, especially though in Austria. So, things to note immediately as being different from the XC90. Well, of course, this is a smaller car, and because of this, it feels a lot more responsive and immediate. We were very impressed with the responsiveness of the XC90 given its size. But obviously, there's only so much you can achieve with a car that has that size and that weight. This car, the XC60, feels nimble, light, and very, very adept at handling these roads. Now, oftentimes when you have an electric motor as well as a petrol or diesel, it's really the big question as to how they combine that power to create an output that is not going to bother or in any way impact on the drive of the car. Well, we have all-wheel drive here. That gives us very good control when we're off and out around the bends, around the hills. But throughout town, the switching is actually pretty effortless indeed. We have dials that tell us the state of the battery and what the charge is like, and they let us know what our potential electric range is. But I have to tell you, if nobody explains to you that this is an electric motor as well as a standard one, you are certainly not going to be able to notice. It performs absolutely effortlessly. Now, this is not a cheap car, and because of that, I would expect every element of this driving experience to be poised, precise, effortless, nice. The challenge with an SUV is always, can you deliver the comfort on-road that you expect to be able to achieve off-road with all of those design features that were necessary to give it the performance that you're looking for there? In the case of the XC60, I can absolutely tell you the answer is yes, and in spades. This isn't a cheap car, so I don't expect anything less, to be completely honest with you. But the Volvo XC60 absolutely delivers. It just puts a smile on your face and keeps you smiling. From the moment that you pull away and right throughout the drive, it's just so easy. But what's really nice about this car is that you feel that you have something of a caged tiger waiting to come out. It doesn't bother you when you're driving through town. You can potter about here and there and it's really pretty straightforward. But you know, when you want that power, when you want to get the most out of the driving experience in this car, you can put your foot down and wow, it really delights. For a car of this size and this style, there is stacks of drivability to it. Now, driving experience overall, what would you expect? A fantastic position on the road, great all-round visibility. Volvo obviously always paying that little extra attention to driver safety and comfort. That means I'm not bothered by things like the B-pillar. It's very nicely proportioned and positioned. My rear view is excellent, especially with this being an SUV. And my total driver's experience is superb. Steering is crisp and responsive, the brakes are excellent, the automatic gearbox is fantastic. They've had a lot of time to get this right, and they really have nailed it. I would challenge anyone to drive this car and tell me that they were disappointed in the way in which it handled. Okay, you might be less than satisfied with the price tag, but once you've learned to live with that, you are going to be very happy with what you get for your money. Everything resonates quality here. The road noise is really nicely deadened and the drive experience is very comfortable. If I have one criticism, and it would be a very personal one to me, I would say it sits with the air suspension. There's a little bit too much comfort for me, if anything. Yes, we have the driving modes, and if I push down and select and I say, well, really what I want to do is get as much feedback as I can from the suspension, I've selected Power Sporty Driving now. Well, immediately the steering is a little bit more responsive, the brakes are a little bit more immediate, and even though the air suspension has been tightened up a little bit, it's still air suspension. That means for me, the number one thing it delivers is comfort. And really what I want is as much feedback from the road as possible, especially to enjoy a dynamic driving style and making the most of all the power I have available. It might not be the fairest criticism. After all, it is absolutely extraordinary the level of comfort that you can achieve now with air suspension, and you really will appreciate that when you put hundreds of miles on this car, as I'm sure you will. But when you want to get out into those country roads and you really want every single bit of feedback the car has to offer you, it's just lacking a little bit of grit for me. But as I say, that's maybe just my personal opinion. Well, last but by no means least, it's finally time to take the XC40 out to see what it can deliver in the Alps. Well, the first thing to mention is that we do have a 3-cylinder engine, and that means if you stand outside of this car and listen to it running, you could be mistaken for thinking it's actually a diesel. It's not. That's just a quirk of a 3-cylinder. Well, given that it only has 3 cylinders to play with, does it produce enough power to make it usable? Well, pleasingly, it still delivers a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour time of under 10 seconds. And how does that look practically? Well, that power is being delivered to us via a 6-speed manual gearbox. And I have to tell you, it's not bad at all. There's a lot more power than you'd expect from a small car like this. And the first thing that you notice when you actually sit in this car and start to drive it is just how pleasantly that power is delivered to you. The steering is tight and responsive, and yes, I understand that the last word in luxury is air suspension, and of course we experience that in the XC60 and the XC90. I've got to tell you, I'm more than a little bit pleased to get back my regular suspension. Now, before we talk a little bit more about that, this tunnel does afford us an opportunity to talk about one of the compromises we have with the XC40. I'm sure you're picking up on that. The noise suppression within the cabin is not fantastic. We don't have the largest tyres in the world, so we should be experiencing relatively low levels of cabin noise. Now, pleasingly, it doesn't actually change once you start getting faster, so it's not that it's a problem. It's just that it is significantly noticeable after you've experienced the ride in the larger 2 vehicles. It's just worth mentioning. But honestly, I think you're going to be enjoying the drive so much, you really won't notice it. It's absolutely fantastic to see how much fun they've packed into this car. Once you see the interior, you are inclined to think, well, surely it's just going to be a string of compromises in terms of how this vehicle handles. But you know what? It really isn't. Everything they know about making these cars drive well carries through into the smaller one. It's absolutely superb. Now, I was a little bit worried when I looked at the exterior of this car and saw how high it was by comparison to its bigger brothers, that it might suffer a little bit too much from body roll once you start getting onto those curvy roads. Well, you know what? It unquestionably does have that body roll you'd expect, but absolutely no more. It still delivers your driving experience in a really pleasant, straightforward and easy way. Well, we've had the opportunity to drive it around some fairly unchallenging, straightforward roads, and I think that's enough to tell us how it drives around town. But what I really want to see with this car is how it handles once you get it up into the mountains on those lovely twisty roads. Are we going to pay a big price for this greater height and that shorter wheelbase? Let's find out. Well, now we've come to a nice mountainous area so we can really get a sense of quite how the XC40 handles. I have to tell you, anyone who's ever been to Austria will have made a good point of mentioning to you, if there's one thing you need to know about being here, It's that the police are extremely serious about the speed limits on these roads, so you do have to be a little bit careful. Now, like its bigger brothers, we also have driving modes available for us in this car. But unlike its bigger brothers, those are not on a nice tactile wheel right in the middle of the console. We have to reach over to the side to get what we're looking for. Now, obviously, we're going to want to put this car in dynamic to see exactly what sort of a change that makes to the driving experience. And although we're not going to go crazy, we are going to have a look and see what the handling does. Now, as I said earlier, we are expecting a little bit of body roll on these corners, and we are going to get that. But hopefully, we should have enough of a balance. The first thing I'm going to want to point out to you is how nicely this power is delivered through the gearbox. I often think that you tell a lot about a gearbox once you put it up into the hills and you can really see how it delivers at different rev points. And I think we may have taken a wrong turn. It's often the case with the new cars when we take them out for review that the compasses haven't quite been calibrated fully. And what that means is that using the sat-nav can sometimes be a little bit of a hit or miss affair. So we've gone a little bit past our turn there. It does, however, afford us an opportunity just to have a look at some of the scenery that we're driving through. I don't know, Thomas, it looks a lot like Cambridge, where I come from. I think Dortmund too, yes?
Yes, Dortmund, yeah, very high mountains, really.
Similar, yes. This is why it's called an alpine scenery, because alpine made famous by Dortmund and also by Cambridge, I think.
Yeah.
Now, we learned earlier today that this is one of the most famous mountain biking areas in the whole world. And I'm not sure if we can pick up on the camera just there some of the ski areas, but all of these are running right throughout the summer because they provide amazing downhill opportunities for mountain biking. So Thomas is a very enthusiastic mountain biker, not so much this one, but more the other one. And I think he might be a little bit jealous that we got to come here and experience this. But I think I prefer to experience it while driving in a car. How about you? You would be very hard-pressed to find anyone who would tell you that they don't like these cars. There are an awful lot of awards sitting here in front of you, and there's a very good reason for that. The only criticism everybody always has for Volvo is, yeah, it's great, but can you justify the cost? Because all of this certainly isn't cheap. Well, I have really surprised myself on this trip. I will admit, before coming here, I expected it to be a runaway for me with the XC60. Why? Well, because it represents for me the perfect between compromising on space and power and luxury. We certainly did have a very nice model to test, and the hybrid engine is fabulous. Obviously, if you need to transport 7 people around, it's a no-brainer. You're going to go with the 90. If you don't have to have that challenge and you want the most nimble, athletic drive, then the 60. But for me, the runaway success of the troop is the 40. Why? Well, because I am more than happy with the result of the car as it's designed. Yes, when you sit in the cockpit, you think, oh, they've saved quite a bit of money here, but that is the only place that money has been saved. The ride is absolutely fantastic. If you can learn to live with a manual gearbox, and let's be honest, I think most of us can, and if it's as well executed as it is here, look at what you're getting for your money. It is such good value in terms of a Volvo SUV. I can't quite believe how much of the driving experience they've managed to cram into such a small body and without compromising at all in terms of your enjoyment as a driver. So that's 2 thumbs up from me on the XC40. I love the other two, but I think at heart, what I really want most when I'm driving a car is fun. And I'm gonna need to have really rather a lot of fun once we start getting up into the 100,000 bracket. This car is only half that much money. And really, for me, it delivers at least as much fun. Yeah, I can't fit 7 people in here, but you know what? I'm going to be too busy laughing about the amount of money that I saved when buying it. I don't know that I'm going to be all that bothered. Well, that's about it from us. I hope you've enjoyed watching this as much as Thomas and I have enjoyed making it. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you would like more in-depth on these cars, then please check out Thomas's full reviews. We will link to those beneath in the comments. Please subscribe, and we hope we'll see you again soon.